Chaos continues at the southern border of the U.S. as one state files suit against the Biden administration. What will be the long-term effects for U.S. security? Former Acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Ken Cuccinelli, is here with analysis. With vaccine mandates on the rise across the U.S. and around the world, is there a theological justification for mandatory vaccinations? Moral theologian Dr. Janet Smith shares her thoughts. And are vaccination mandates constitutional? And how might they be challenged in court? Minnesota attorney GREGORY ERICKSON weighs in. Finally, a group of seminarians in Germany have just released a beautiful new Christmas collection of sacred chant, Sancta Vox. One of them is here to tell us all about it. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. An important show for you tonight. If you'd like to comment, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover this evening, but first, some news. The Holy See announced this week that it will require all of its employees to be fully vaccinated or to submit to regular COVID testing. According to a report in the Washington Post, employees failing to provide proof of vaccination will be considered, quote, unjustly absent and receive no salary. The order takes effect October 1st. Following up on a story we brought you last week, the Canadian Archdiocese of Moncton will not require parishioners to be fully vaccinated in order to attend Mass. Archbishop Valerie Viano announced the reversal after conferring with local public officials. Instead, the diocese will require masks in churches and will limit gatherings to 50% capacity. Proof of vaccination will still be required for special events like weddings and funerals. More on these stories later with Dr. Janet Smith. Now, the state of Florida is suing the Biden administration over its immigration policy at the southern border as more migrants and refugees from Haiti, Afghanistan, and elsewhere enter the state. Do they have legitimate asylum claims? And how is the Biden administration's immigration policy affecting national security? Joining us to discuss this and much more, former Acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Ken Cuccinelli. Ken, thanks for being with us. I want to begin with Florida. Attorney General Ashley Moody announced this lawsuit Tuesday, claiming the Biden administration's immigration policy is illegal. Now, following that announcement, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis had this to say at a press conference. Watch.
The state of Florida is suing the Biden administration over its unlawful and destructive catch and release policy. They want a massive illegal migration into this country, and it's obvious in the policies that they're choosing. They don't talk about the destination of the people that are being resettled in Florida, and they don't talk about the number who have been resettled in Florida who have been COVID positive. So they don't tell us a lot of stuff. They don't say whether they have a criminal record. They don't say whether they've failed to appear for their removal proceedings. And we're entitled to know, given that we bear the cost of most of this with our services, our criminal justice system, our education system.
Ken, first, your reaction to this lawsuit, and do these governors actually have a right to any of this information?
Well, whether I don't recall a statute that would give them a right to the information per se, but more importantly, there is a statute that says that the Department of Homeland Security will essentially detain people who come into the country illegally until their status is determined. That means they will not be released. So on the fundamental question of whether catch and release is legal or not, they're in a very good position to at least be able to make an argument for that based on a federal statute. They can claim quite clearly that Joe Biden, as president, is not abiding by federal law.
And that's by allowing these people just to come into the country, really with just they don't even have scheduled to appear before court order.
Right.
It's just a kind of check-in with authorities at some point order, which is I've never heard of, Ken. What is this? Where did this come from?
I mean, honestly, Raymond, I think that the only purpose of it is so they can tell you and me and the rest of America, well, we've got them coming back in. We're staying in touch with them. I mean, it is truly about that useful. And we have seen a big difference between what this administration says to the American people and what they do. All of us tell our kids, right? Actions speak louder than words. And their actions and their omissions, they have an open door policy. They're inviting people to come in illegally. And then when they do catch and detain any, they release them. And that is the focus of the Florida lawsuit. Attorney General Modi is in a very good position to move forward on this, and it'll be interesting to see how the federal judges handle it.
Ken, Ron DeSantis also signed an order prohibiting state agencies from assisting the relocation of these undocumented immigrants arriving in his state. How effective do you think that tactic is, and how do you think the administration might respond to that?
So I don't think it'll be very effective. However, I would say that intentional resettlement, which is usually, by the way, done just with refugees. We never resettled illegal aliens. This is a planned effort that starts before they come in the country, and with 9, including one Catholic at least, resettlement agencies and so forth. That is not what's happening with these illegal aliens coming over the border. That instead of using our taxpayer dollars to repatriate them and deport them home, they're using our taxpayer dollars to fly and bus them around the country without regard, by the way, for their COVID status frequently. And so because that cooperation isn't taking place already, I don't know that it'll have a lot of practical effect. What it will do is for the illegals themselves, when they end up in a particular community, it may take them longer to sort of connect up with the community in any way that they might, like get a driver's license for those states that allow such things. I don't think Florida is one. But those kinds of logistical things that often take place just as a function of living life.
Ken, Florida is not the only place in the U.S. suing this administration over their policies at the border. Valverde County in Texas, which saw about 30,000 migrants earlier this month, has said it's going to unite with neighboring counties to sue the Biden administration to push for more enforcement at the border. Do you expect to see more of these lawsuits from these states along the southern border or counties along the southern border?
I do, for 2 reasons. One substantive and one more appearance, and I don't mean to make that sound shallow. But one, the substantive one, is they're looking for any way at all to protect themselves, to protect their school budgets, to protect their communities from the crime that comes along with this, both petty and more severe. They're looking for ways. So those are the substantive ones. And then the appearance ones, which are important, though not as important as actual accomplishment, is the fact that it points up the desperation. It puts a human and a community picture on the devastation that Joe Biden has invited on this country. And for your viewers, I'd invite them to look at Article 4, Section 4 of their Constitution, which is the federal government's commitment to protect every state from invasion. At least the border states, the federal government isn't even attempting to keep that commitment. And so these localities are desperate. You know, last year their school board expected X number of students. Well, now we've got thousands more that we never expected and don't speak English and so forth. The cost and burden of that is utterly destructive of the people already in their community.
This week, former President Barack Obama even seemed to suggest that the Biden administration's border policies were not working. Here's what he told ABC in an interview.
Immigration is tough. It always has been, because on the one hand, I think we are naturally a people that wants to help others. At the same time, we're a nation state. We have borders. The idea that we can just have open borders is something that I think as a practical matter is unsustainable.
Now, Ken, Obama's criticism here is a departure from what we've been hearing from the administration, which is that the border is secure and it's closed. Your reaction?
Well, first of all, I don't often say this, but from start to finish, I agree with every word President Obama just said, just as he said it, including the comments about our generosity and the tug between being a country of laws and a sovereign nation and our desire to help people. We have all of that in this country. I agree completely. I also agree that that is a departure. He is now sounding a bit of, that's very subtle, but when former President Obama is noting that we have a crisis at the border, effectively, implicitly, that is quite contrary to the rhetoric that I mentioned earlier that we're hearing from this administration that you just noted. Oh, the border's closed, it's secure, nothing to see here, folks, move along, move along. That is not the situation at the border. It is a disaster, it is a crisis, and it affects every community in America, both in terms of, say, drugs and the populations and their schools, and human trafficking.
Well, Ken, look, I was in Del Rio. I was also in Arizona last week. They are being inundated. They don't know what to do. They just don't have the manpower. I mean, according to the U.S. Border Patrol, 200,000 migrants were received at the U.S. border in August alone. The administration's now scrambling to reassemble the Trump Remain in Mexico policy, which said, you know, people had to stay in Mexico to await their status and to be invited in. Biden dismantled that policy. Now he's trying to pick up the pieces. Is it possible, or have they lost Mexico, which is what I'm being told?
Well, we'll see. I mean, that required cooperation from Mexico. And you remember 2.5 years ago, President Trump was very rough in the relationship there, in the negotiation with Mexico to get them to a point of cooperation. But I will say this. When that point of cooperation was achieved, we had never worked better with our Mexican partners, friends, and allies to stem the flow of illegal immigration. And the Remain in Mexico program was the most successful program of all. And it ties in, by the way, to your first subject matter, and that is the Florida lawsuit, because that was the alternative for us to detention in this country, was for cooperation with Mexico to hold them in Mexico until we could process their immigration claims, which, by the way, were overwhelmingly false and fraudulent. And that is as determined by career immigration officers, not political appointees, who also judge all our other cases. And we're approving those cases that were coming up through Mexico across the border at a much lower rate than all the others we deal with, because they didn't have a good legal claim.
Yeah, let's talk about those asylum claims for a minute. Many of these Haitian migrants who came, they claimed that they had a refugee status. But many of them were living in Chile for 7, 8 years. I mean, they had ID cards. They threw a lot of those at the Rio Grande when they entered the country. Do they actually have an asylum claim? And would you say the same about the other people who are streaming across the Rio Grande?
So when you look at the Haitians, you're absolutely right. Chile, Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, they were living in other parts of South and Central America for years. And, you know, people may ask themselves, or if you haven't, you would ask themselves, how did so many people from one country who really haven't been part of the rush of the border for the last 8 months all suddenly show up at the same time? With nothing happening in Haiti, by the way, to be a catalyst. And the answer is, you know, you look closely at the pictures, they all have cell phones, they're communicating through social networks and so forth, and they all decided to come because Joe Biden has made it clear that the border is open and they can walk across. And that's what they're seeing, frankly, in Del Rio. Yes, they have to live through a rather squalid third world looking camp for a few weeks, but this administration buckled, and it isn't even buckling. They want them in. This is an intentional policy. It's not an accident. And the Haitians are just the latest to take advantage of it. But in terms of getting asylum, because they'd established themselves somewhere else, they don't qualify for asylum. And frankly, most of the other folks coming to that border overwhelmingly don't qualify for asylum. Let's look at Central America. This isn't the 1980s anymore. They have governments in all three countries, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, that are working very hard to protect their people and provide them opportunities. That's not what was happening in the 80s, which is sort of people's picture of Central America and the potential for asylum. These are true democracies that just have lesser economies than ours now. And so we'd be better off focusing on getting them trade opportunities and growing their economies, but returning their citizens back to their country when they come into ours illegally.
Can Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas visited that site in Texas where thousands of migrants, most of them Haitian, have been for over a week. More are now coming. We're seeing reports of another flood of Haitian migrants coming. Again, there's nothing driving this. There's no immediate crisis driving this. But listen to Mayorkas.
If you come to the United States illegally, you will be returned. Your journey will not succeed.
Ken Cuccinelli, is that true? At least 12,000 Haitians who came here last week, they've already been resettled in America.
Right. If it were true, they'd stop coming. Lines like that, and we've heard them from Jen Psaki, we've seen them from Vice President Harris, they are not true. They know they are not true. They seem to have no problem saying these words, which are untrue, and they're doing it so they can say, hey, we said don't come. This is purely for media presentation, and nobody believes them. Democrats, their voters don't believe them. That's what the polling has shown since the spring. So this is it's not even a good act for show, but that's all it's for. It is for show. That's also why that Remain in Mexico program was so important to us, is because it isn't enough to say you're going to not let people in this country. People back in the source countries have to know it's true, because people need to start showing back up in those neighborhoods because they couldn't get in the United States.
And we should qualify all of this by saying nobody lets more immigrants into the United States of America in an orderly, legal fashion than the United States of America. So it's not that we're saying close up the, close all the gates.
Year after year, including under President Trump.
Right. So, I mean, everybody has to understand this in context and realize what we're seeing here. Very quickly, Ken, Title 42. This was that health rule that President Trump invoked when COVID hit, to turn people away at the border, saying, wait a minute, we don't know your COVID status, so for the safety of our citizenry, you can't come in. So it was a way to instantly turn them away. Biden said, we're not doing that any longer. Now he's going to court trying to get Title 42 reinstated. Your reaction to this kind of back and forth over Title 42?
They have, so this is the public health order from the CDC about the border. And it's rather obvious. I mean, people come up in these human trafficking rings run by the drug cartels, most evil, vicious people in the Western Hemisphere, in what are human petri dish conditions, all jammed into trucks and stash houses. It is perfect for the spread of a communicable disease. And that is happening, as we know, when on those limited occasions when we get information about COVID status, it's high positivity rates. They're being moved on anyway. They're also coming from countries with low vaccination rates. Not that that stops the spread, but it ameliorates the impact when people do get sick. And so this is a critical source of new variants and new cases into this country. And the hypocrisy of this administration in terms of how they're effectively cracking down hard on American citizens over COVID. At the same time, they're literally casting aside any rules, requirements, or restrictions for people who come in here illegally. It's incredible. At some point, you're going to see an inequality claim in these COVID cases where a citizen's going to say, I'm not being treated the same as an illegal immigrant. It'll be one of the claims.
Yeah, well, but when you're talking about charging people, and I'm going to get to this later in the show, when you're talking about penalizing companies $700,000 for not having a fully vaccinated staff, And you're throwing open the gates of the country and saying, "Come on in, everybody." That's a huge problem here. Ken, I've got to hit this. 177 faith-based organizations and almost 2,000 faith leaders have written a letter to the Biden administration expressing their dismay with the resumption of these deportation flights to Haiti. Now, there are only a limited number of them. They didn't. It's not like they deported, 20,000 people. They didn't, or all 15,000 that came in the first wave. We already know 12,000 are in country. Is there a profit motive here for some of these faith-based organizations where they earn millions in refugee resettlement and loan commissions?
Yeah, so there are so-called nonprofits that are paid to do refugee resettlement. That's how it is accomplished in this country. And that has been that way for a while, including, I want to say Catholic Charities is one of the ones with contracts. And so that is a real possibility. But it's also the use of religion to achieve political goals here. It's the Catholic Catechism has a paragraph on immigration, and it says rich nation, and I'm paraphrasing, rich nations should be generous. Well, you and I talked about how generous America already is, but that the migrants have to respect the laws and customs of the place they're going. And that's not happening here. That is not happening here. So, and it hasn't for years. The illegal migrants to this country don't qualify on traditional faith expectation bases to come into the country. They just don't.
In a recent Pew Center poll, the majority of Americans are not confident that the Biden administration is properly vetting these Afghan refugees who have come to the U.S. 27% said they were, quote, not too confident. Another 28% said they're not confident at all. The White House has said it's expecting to resettle up to 95,000 Afghans in the United States. Now, look, Ken, there's a natural instinct, especially here. We've been talking about it throughout. People want to help refugees and migrants coming here. But are all these asylum claims, the Afghan asylum claims, are they legitimate? And what kind of national security issues might this raise?
So asylum is for people who arrive here. We're importing these folks. So to the extent they come, it should be as refugees, which is the same legal standard, but it's discretionary. I mean, we're literally flying people into this country. So open borders is they don't stop them from coming here. We're literally importing them. And we're going to have a civil society problem with this population. We are close culturally, but to the vast number of people who even come illegally over our southern border. That is not the case with the Afghanis. And the Pew Foundation did a longitudinal study several years back. 61% of these folks believe that you and I, non-Muslims, should have to live under Sharia law. 79% think stoning to death is an appropriate punishment for adultery, and almost 40% think that it's acceptable under some circumstances to use suicide bombings in defense of Islam. These are not consistent with basic American principles. We're a country of immigrants, we're a melting pot, but only if you're willing to melt in and adopt our values. And those values are reflected in the Constitution, including the First Amendment. And that is not consistent with this population that is not being vetted as they come in. That's a terrible mix with the Homeland Security risks that we're taking by bringing this population in here.
Final question, Ken. Is there any consideration being given to Christian Afghanis looking to come to the U.S.? I mean, according to Open Doors World Watch list, Afghanistan's the second worst country for Christians in the world. Why are they given no priority? I mean, it seems to me they have an actual claim of persecution and refugee status, certainly more than the Haitians or a guy who just happened to work for the Afghan military and got paid handsomely for a few weeks.
Yeah, so the one group there that I think most Americans are supportive of coming are those who did help us in Afghanistan, but that's a very small number. The number of Christians also small, but living under the Taliban is deadly dangerous. There are groups, unfortunately, not including our own government, who are below the radar working to get Christians out of Afghanistan, and they're trying to stay below the radar because it's not safe for either them or their charges to be learned about. And, as much as people might, pat them on the back, say good job, they're trying to focus on their mission. And I'm familiar with a number of these folks, and God bless them. They're doing a lot of good work. And but it is hard and challenging when the main place you'd look for help, the U.S. government, turns its back on you. And that is what this administration has done for Christians in Afghanistan, frankly, much like many of our own citizens.
No, it's a heartbreaker. We destabilize the region, and then we leave them to die. And and as we talked about, the vetting is not where it should be. It takes months to a year to vet these people. We're vetting them in minutes and days now. It's absurd. Ken Cuccinelli, wish we had more time. We'll leave it there. You can follow Ken at Ken Cuccinelli on Twitter. Thank you.
Thanks, Raymond. Good to be with you.
As vaccine mandates become more common all over the world, including the Vatican, religious terminology is being employed to persuade people of faith to overcome vaccine hesitancy. Can a theological case be made for mandatory vaccination? Here to weigh in is retired professor of moral theology at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in the Archdiocese of Detroit, Dr. Janet Smith. Dr. Smith, thank you for being here. I want to begin with a piece you wrote this week in Crisis magazine entitled "The Fake Theology Behind Vaccine Mandates." Now, in your piece, you respond to a professor of bioethics who is also a member of the Pontifical Academy for Life, Teresa Lysett, who in the National Catholic Reporter, of all places, argues that Catholics seeking religious exemptions must follow true church teaching and in good conscience must receive a COVID-19 vaccination. Why is she wrong?
Well, first of all, I mean, the church simply has no authority to teach that. And it hasn't taught that. Even on a casual plane, it hasn't done that. It's given very strong encouragement for us to take it, but it definitely has not said that we have a moral obligation that we must do it and that it's a matter of church teaching that we must do it.
Janet, the Pope has called receiving the vaccine an act of love, and Teresa Lysett and a number of bishops cite the Pope's comments as proof that the vaccines are not only moral, but obligatory. Your thoughts?
Well, as we all know, no Holy Father, qua Holy Father, has any kind of expertise in what vaccines are safe and which are not safe. That's not their area of expertise. The Church very clearly teaches us that there's even what it calls an autonomy to the sciences. They come up with their own conclusions, and the conclusions of the science surrounding the vaccines has been very unsettled ever since they were brought into existence. So the church can only say that we have to act for the common good. Yes, it can teach that authoritatively. Whether or not taking the vaccine would be for the common good is entirely up to question. And in the CDF statement, a note on the issue, it tells us that we are free to seek other alternatives for fighting the COVID disease, the virus, that we don't have to.
Yeah, let me quote that document, because you quote this in your article, and you say this is the most authoritative document we have, and it's the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith's note on the morality of using some anti-COVID-19 vaccines. And you say it doesn't urge people to get the vaccine and makes it clear there's no moral obligation to get it. It reads, at the same time, practical reason makes evident that vaccination is not, as a rule, a moral obligation, and that therefore it must be voluntary. Now, Janet, God and moral obligations are being invoked by everybody, including secular leaders now. New York Governor Kathy Hochul said this last Sunday. Watch.
Yes, I know you're vaccinated. You're the smart ones, but you know there's people out there who aren't listening to God and what God wants. You know this. You know who they are. I need you to be my apostles. I need you to go out and talk about it and say, we owe this to each other. We love each other. Jesus taught us to love one another. And how do you show that love? But to care about each other enough to say, please get vaccinated because I love you. I want you to live.
I wonder if that applies to unborn kids in New York. But your reaction to that, Dr. Smith?
No, I don't have any idea what the name of her God is, or how she has access to him telling her that. I mean, the fact is, it may be a gift of love not to take the vaccine. If some of the scientists are right who are saying that the vaccines are very harmful in the immediate moment, especially to the young who might contract all sorts of diseases because of taking the vaccine, but they may forever alter our whole immune system. And maybe down the line, we're going to have much healthier immune systems, those who have gotten the COVID and recovered, which is almost everybody who's gotten the COVID has recovered, and those who never get it. We will have possibly have much healthier immune systems than those who get the vaccines. Sometimes I haven't gotten the vaccine yet. I haven't completely ruled it out, but it's kind of a joke. I mean, I'm part of the control group. This is a huge experiment that we never got through the third phase of testing the vaccine. There have to be some people who don't get it to see how it does. And of course, some scientists are saying that the super spreaders now are those who have the vaccine, that they have a much higher viral load than the unvaccinated. I mean, the incongruence of saying that the vaccinated are at risk because of the unvaccinated, that's a very hard thing to get into your head.
No, well, Dr. Smith, look, neither of us are doctors or scientists or epidemiologists, but I talk to a lot of them. And it is fascinating how the science of this has moved since the first announcement in Wuhan to today. And the science has moved and our knowledge of it has evolved. And that's why I think, look, it's critical. You need to consult with your doctor. Every person is different. There are those who are really elderly and immunocompromised. Then on the other hand, there are people who are very young and strong and have natural immunity in some cases. All of that has to be taken into consideration when you make this decision. And, you know, you talked about the viral load. There's that story out of New York. They opened the Broadway production of Aladdin on Tuesday night. Big fanfare. It closed on Wednesday night because despite the complete vaccination of staff, crew, cast, and audience, there was a COVID outbreak. So they shut the production down. So it's a very curious thing that's happening. And again, that has to be noted. And you have to react to that and take that in scientifically and otherwise. Now, in your piece, you point out prudential judgment is needed in applying moral principles to specific policy choices. Why don't we hear more about prudential judgment from the leaders of our church today vis-a-vis vaccines or anything else?
Yeah, or anything else is exactly the point. You remember John Paul II was opposed to us going into the war in Iraq. Now, maybe in retrospect, he was right. But at the time, everybody said, yes, that's his opinion. Okay, making decisions about the temporal realm, the secular realm, is really that, but prudential decisions of the here and now, what to do, whether I personally should take the vaccine. The church cannot make that decision for me. The church cannot make the decision that you should marry this person. It can tell you can't marry some because they don't fit the qualifications of canon law, but the church can never tell you exact person must marry that exact person. Those are prudential decisions that only the person can make. So it's outside of the realm of expertise of the church to talk about what vaccines you must take. It's out of the realm of the church to say that any particular individual must do any particular thing besides that's mandated by God. But it's our physical integrity also that's being attacked. Our bodies are our bodies, and they really are for our sake. I mean, the church couldn't tell me that I had to give my kidney to the Holy Father if he needed one. Right? It couldn't do that. That's my decision. And it might be, oh my gosh, he's so important. He's the Holy Father. You've got 2 kidneys. Why wouldn't you give him one? It would even be wrong for the church to put any kind of pressure on any person to do that, because God gave us our organs and our bodies for us. And how I use my body for the common good is that's my decision for all the different values, all the certain duties that I've taken upon, everything that I've done. How can I best perform the duties that God has asked me to perform? Nobody can decide that for me.
Dr. Smith, you've heard the argument. You know what, and I can hear people in the audience saying it, but wait a minute, by taking this vaccine, you're protecting all the lives you encounter throughout the day, that you are giving protection to friends, older relatives, classmates, everybody. Why is that thinking off?
Well, I mean, you just gave an example of Broadway opening, and we see all these people in the hospital that have been vaccinated, and they're getting the COVID anyway. And so you're saying the science is so unsettled on this that it seems to me it's very unfair to tell people that the science is settled and you must do what science says. I mean, I grew up with the formaldehyde generation, and there's all sorts of times when science really thought it knew what it was supposed to do. And then, sometime later, of course, cigarettes were once considered to be absolutely safe, safe.
Healthy.
So, yeah, and they've so many things that they've lied to us about in the last 2 years about COVID. We now find out that there was no scientific basis at all for 6 feet social distancing. We've seen our grandparents die without any visitation in nursing homes. And these are the people I'm expected to trust. I just don't see it. I don't see why I should trust them. I'm listening to other equally credentialed doctors, and not just one crank, not just one off the reservation doctor, but large groups of them. Anytime you consult an expert, you have to listen to see if are there any other experts, and why should I believe this one versus that one? And it's not majority. Don't tell me it's majority, because the majority has often been very sadly wrong.
Yeah, I also think we all have to have a grave dose of humility when it comes to this COVID pandemic, because so many have been wrong, and the science has evolved and moved so fast that you can't be too definite, because you may be proven wrong tomorrow, as we're seeing before our eyes. The Vatican has mandated, Dr. Smith, that anyone entering the Vatican must show proof of vaccination. Now, there is no mention here of a religious exemption. I mean, aborted fetal tissue was used in the research and in some cases the production of these vaccines. What do you make of the fact that the Vatican fails to mention any sort of religious exemption?
Sadly shocking, as well as thinking that the main altar in St. Peter's hasn't been used for, a year and a half or something. These things are mystifying in the extreme. That there's so many priests who are so ready to perform the sacrament, so ready to attend people, and are being told by their bishops, first of all, that they couldn't do it during the height of the pandemic, the lockdown, and now they can't do it unless they're vaccinated, even if they make it known to everybody that they're not vaccinated, and people are happy to have their services anyway. But it's as if the immortal soul is no longer their chief concern, that the chief concern is our physical health. And good Catholics love to be healthy. And that's the other huge thing, of course, is that they haven't been telling us how to do preventative measures from getting the COVID. There's lots of them. And those who have been doing them are feeling very good and very healthy. A lot of them have never gotten the COVID because they've taken precautions.
As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Smith, the Canadian Archdiocese of Moncton has rescinded a policy that required all Catholics wishing to enter church buildings to show proof of vaccination. Your thoughts on this mandate coming from a Catholic archbishop? Now, he rescinded that order, as we reported earlier.
Well, as you said, it's in place in the Vatican, so I don't know why we have to be so concerned about someone who's rescinded it. But yeah, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see policies in place, policies rescinded. I don't see why we aren't basically back to business as usual. And people taking precautions, if you're sick, stay home. If you're concerned about spreading it or getting it, if you think wearing a mask helps, wear it. If you think wearing a mask does not help, don't wear it. I mean, I just can't see that we have really solid science on any end of this thing, except if you're sick, stay home. Get your vitamin D, get outside, take your zinc, take your quercetin, take all these things. And stay healthy as much as you possibly can. And when you're not, stay home.
Dr. Janet Smith, thank you so much.
I'm not a doctor. Yeah, I'm not a doctor.
I know you're a doctor, but not that kind of doctor. Thank you, Dr. Smith. Thank you for your insights. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Nearly 200 Minnesota healthcare workers have filed a federal lawsuit against 20 Minnesota healthcare providers throughout the state over the pending requirement to take the COVID vaccine or risk losing their job. This is one of many lawsuits being filed across the country requesting religious exemptions from taking the vaccine. Joining me now to discuss this and more is attorney representing those health workers in Minnesota, Gregory Erickson. Gregory, thank you for being here. I want to start with the Minnesota healthcare workers you're representing. They filed this lawsuit against the vaccine mandate based on religious beliefs. The filing seeks a quick hearing and a temporary injunction to bar any terminations or attempts to put unvaccinated workers on unpaid leave. Why are you only looking for a temporary injunction, and how many people are involved in this lawsuit?
Well, first of all, there's 188 people involved, but more are joining every day. So it's hard to say what the numbers are going to be at the end, but they are most definitely growing. In terms of why are we only asking for temporary relief, that's how this works procedurally, okay? What we are asking for eventually is what's called a permanent injunction, which would bar the employer forever from enforcing their vaccine mandate. But procedurally,
but that'll take time to win through the courts.
Exactly. What we moved for originally is a temporary restraining order to give us time to give all sides proper time to brief the temporary injunction proceeding, okay? And that stays in place until trial, and then there's a permanent injunction.
Let me ask you this, Gregory. Will religious exemptions hold up in court? And how do they compare with medical exemptions?
Well, in this particular case, it's relatively bizarre because we do have clients, actually quite a few of them, whose religious exemptions are being granted. The problem with those grants is that they are conditional. And that's why those folks are still staying in the case, because they have to live under the specter of having their religious exemption pulled out at any time. The strange thing is that virtually all medical exemptions are being denied, because that would require them to go off their talking point that the vaccine is perfectly safe.
Greg, hundreds, according to reports, but to my eye, thousands of healthcare workers across the country are facing termination or resigning over this Biden mandate. This mandate affects 17 million workers in any facility that receives Medicaid or Medicare reimbursement. Can this withstand judicial review and judicial challenge?
To be honest with you, even more so than judicial scrutiny and challenge, I don't think it can withstand the practical challenge of the business of providing care to Americans. I can tell you that the number of people that are going to be terminated if this, or are going to leave their jobs if this mandate is enforced to the T, it's not going to be in the thousands. It's going to be in the hundreds of thousands, if not a million. Okay, and what we are suffering from currently is a nationwide critical nursing shortage. Partly because the working conditions under COVID were so awful that any nurse that was even remotely close to retirement said, "I'm out of here." Okay, and so we have a nationwide critical situation that is just completely being ignored by the Biden administration. Okay, and the law itself, as it relates to the religious exemptions and the party's ability to ask for and get a religious exemption, is extremely strong on behalf of our clients. And some of the employers have acknowledged this and have granted a good number of these exemptions albeit on a conditional basis.
Well, that's the question. I mean, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits employment discrimination based on religion, which includes refusing to accommodate an employee's sincerely held belief. So my question is this: any accommodation that would impose an undue hardship, I mean, on the employee, that would violate Title VII, would it not? So if you said, okay, you're not going to get, you have to stay home, or you have to be furloughed, or you're not going to be paid, or you have to go get a COVID test every time you walk in, is that enough of an accommodation?
Well, first of all, you mentioned a number of things. Okay.
Yeah.
I believe that, first of all, if patient safety is really at the heart of this thing, okay, and not just compelling everyone to take the vaccine just to basically get people dependent on government, okay? If patient safety is truly at the heart of this thing, what would happen is, on a daily basis, both the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, okay, would be tested. Because the reality of the situation in the US right now is that people who are vaccinated are getting and transmitting Delta at basically the same rates as the unvaccinated. So if at the end of the day, what the Biden administration really cares about, or these employers really care about, is safety of the people under their care, then everybody's got to be tested, not just the unvaccinated. And to be honest with you, I can guarantee that will very unlikely happen, because that would disincentivize the vaccine, which is clearly the goal of this administration.
Earlier this month, Gregory, a federal judge in New York temporarily blocked the state from forcing medical workers there to be vaccinated. In a statement, Dr. Joseph Sellers, who's president of the Medical Society of the state of New York, said, "We believe this step will result in a flurry of attempts to circumvent the well-reasoned vaccination requirement. No major religious denomination opposes vaccinations, and the Supreme Court has for over 100 years upheld vaccination requirements as a means to protect public health." Now, in New York State, a federal judge ordered hospitals to accept religious exemptions from the mandate. But for a religious exemption, does it matter if other people in your faith or the leaders of a particular faith don't agree with your position on vaccines?
Well, I can tell you that there is I assume all of the country bishops have spoken to this, but I can tell you specifically that the bishop up in Duluth, Minnesota, has spoken exactly to this, okay? And the bishop was clear, is that under the Catholic religion, the fact that the Pope says that the taking the vaccine is not a sin does not preclude a Catholic from using their religion to say, hey, the fetal cells are involved in the manufacture of these vaccines, and I just can't sanction it because my own personal relationship with God will not allow that. So the Catholic bishop of Duluth, Minnesota, a higher up in the Catholic Church in this state, has spoken directly to this issue, and he says that is not inconsistent in any way, shape, or form with the Catholic faith to be opposed to the vaccine because of the involvement of the fetal cells.
Before I let you go, Gregory, this is a breaking story. Buried on page 168 of this House spending bill, okay, that's moving through Congress, it increases the fines employers could run as high as $70,000 for serious infractions and $700,000 for willful or repeated violations. So if you violate the vaccine mandate, you could get hit for $700,000. That's in addition to the $14,000 OSHA fine anticipated under Biden's announced mandate. Your reaction to that, and whether that's legal?
Well, in my estimation, no, it is not in any way, shape, or form. And the reality is when conservatives don't step up and properly stand up for themselves, the progressives are just going to run wild all over us, and that's what's going on. I mean, they've just completely hijacked the Democratic Party, and I mean, I just think that that's outrageous to bill a company that kind of money for refusing to vaccinate their employees and respecting.
Well, it's meant to break businesses, obviously.
Yeah, without question, it is utilization of the heavy hand of the state to beat employers into submission to comply to this mandate. And I think that the Supreme Court is not going to allow that to stand. I just cannot imagine that they will allow that to stand.
Greg Erickson, we will leave it there. We thank you for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As Christmas time approaches, what better way to prepare for the season than beautiful sacred music? Tonight, we've got just the thing. An international community of young seminarians in Germany recently gathered to record selections of early choral music around some ancient Christmas melodies. Known as the Seminarians of St Peter, Wigratzbad, these young men have teamed with De Montfort Music and Sophia Music Group for their inspirational new CD, Sancta Vox, Holy Night, Christmas Matins from Bavaria. Please welcome vocalist and seminarian Manuel Vaz Guedes. Thank you for being here, Manuel. We should mention the seminary began in 1988 under the priestly fraternity of St. Peter. How does the liturgy contribute and enhance the music you and your fellow seminarians sing daily and the music you chose to sing for Sancta Vox?
Liturgy for us, music is entirely connected with liturgy for us. So we sing to God, and music is perfectly integrated in liturgy. So the idea of the songs came from our own choir chief. He wanted this to be a liturgical experience. So we wanted to show the world in some way how we pray in this Christmas night. And Matins is a very important part of the divine office for us, and which is a public prayer of the church that priests and monks pray every single day, or even sing it every single day.
I want to give people a little taste of what they'll be hearing. Watch this.
We're very blessed that we can now share this music with the wider public. The treasures of Renaissance polyphony brings people closer to the mystery, the great mystery of Christmas.
Manuel, it really is beautiful. And the subtitle of the CD, as you mentioned before we showed that clip, is Christmas Matins from Bavaria. Can you elaborate a bit on the significance of Matins and why these particular pieces were chosen?
Well, the Matins is the part of the divine office. It's the beginning of divine office. So for us, it's the beginning of the journey, beginning of our day, when we start praying God. And in Christmas night, it's a very important moment for us, that it's the beginning of Christmas night mass. It precedes Christmas night mass. So invitation to adore. So we say labia mea aperies. And it's like, open my mouth to praise you, O Lord. And so it's the very beginning of this adoration in Christmas.
You recorded the music for Sancta Vox at St. Magnus Abbey with award-winning producer Christopher Alder. And we should add The music was recorded in surround sound using Apple's new spatial audio technology. What was it like working with Alder? And tell us a little about the location of this beautiful abbey and how it contributed to the music and the sound quality here.
So the abbey is a typical Baroque abbey, although it was built in the 12th century, and it was built for regular canons, so kind of monks. And it's as I said, the architecture, it's typical 16th Baroque. And it has a very good acoustics. It's very clear. So to record, it was just perfect. And working with Christopher was a wonderful experience. So some of us already knew his work with gramophone, Deutsche Grammophon. I knew because he had recorded with Maria João Pires, a famous pianist, Portuguese pianist. And it was fantastic to work with him. He's very wise. Not only he has a musical culture, but Latin culture very developed. And yes, Chris enjoyed that acoustic so much that he and Christian Weigel, they decided to record in surround for Dolby Spatial Audio. That I was told that is a very groundbreaking audio recording.
What is it about Gregorian chant and polyphony that continues to move and inspire people, do you think? And tell us about the roots of this music.
Gregorian chant and polyphony, they just give, it's the perfect channel to pass beauty and truth and goodness. So truth, because it's the music, this melody that is made for the lyrics, and the lyrics are made in some way by God himself or by saints or by the church. And so melodies are made to praise God himself. And it's connected with the church. It is in Latin, which is the universal language of the church. And I think people can appreciate it. Even if they are not searching for good or truth, they can appreciate it by its beauty.
Manuel, before I let you go, what do you hope Sancta Vox will bring to listeners this Christmas season? And while we're still navigating this pandemic, what's the message contained in this music?
I think this music can bring peace and joy, but true peace and joy. They are not only vague words. So as the second responsorium of Christmas that we sing, it expresses it beautifully. So, Odie nobis decello, pax vera descendit. So today, true peace descends from heaven. And I think people are searching for this peace, for this joy of Christmas. And it's the perfect time to search God himself in its mystery by music, by Gregorian chant and polyphony. And they are in perfect connection with the mystery of Christmas. And we just sing this divine peace that comes from heaven. And that's it. People will find it very joyful, very peaceful, and they will find the truth of this mystery, that is God coming to us as an innocent baby, an innocent infant.
Well, Manuel, I thank you for bringing us the CD, for your time. Sancta Vox, Christmas Matins from Bavaria by De Montfort Music, Sophia Music Group, is available now at music outlets everywhere and online, including Barnes & Noble, iTunes, and at the EWTN Religious Catalog. For more information, you can visit demontfortmusic.com.
Thank you.
That is all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.